Amen. Thank you. Okay, we're starting a new section today, a new chapter. Starting on chapter 23 this morning. So if you want to turn there, chapter 23, section 1, and this has to do with lawful oaths and vows. And I guess I'll give a little bit of background. It seems like a pretty specific thing to put in a confession of faith, doesn't it? Like we've been discussing the Trinity, we've been discussing God's law, we've been discussing the gospel, the atonement, all this, and then something this specific is in there. Does that strike anyone as odd that we'd have a section on here on lawful oaths and vows? It seems very specific, doesn't it? Okay. And I'll give a bit of background why this is included. And the reason it's included has to do with many of us in here today. Who here has a Low German last name? Okay, you're the reason. You look hard in the mirror. You are the reason this is in here. Okay. Okay. What's that? I said we can go home now. You go. Yeah, the Dutch people can go home. This isn't your fault. Yeah. Dutch people get an exemption here. You get an automatic passing grade. Okay, there's a couple things here. Why include this in here? Several reasons. The Presbyterian Westminster Confession of Faith actually includes a similar section as well. So why do these confessions include this? A couple of reasons. One is that in the classical frame of mind, and we're working with a very different frame of reference today, and thankfully going back to the older frame of reference where Christianity is not a private religion, but it's a public religion. So your faith is personal, but it's not meant to be private. It's meant to be public. It's meant to be visible everywhere. And so when the English crown keeps going back and forth between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, the crown has to make a vow. And after the Glorious Revolution, or the Bloodless Revolution of 1688, remember there's a story where King Charles II dies, and his younger brother James II takes the throne, and James is a Roman Catholic, and everyone's kind of okay with it because it's at least legitimate succession and so forth. But when he has a son, everyone starts to panic. We're going to be Catholic again because now this Catholic king has produced a son. This is really bad news. And so it's in the coronation vows, even to this day. Okay, Queen Elizabeth II and King Charles III, our current king of Canada, had to make an oath before God that they would protect the church, that they would advance religion, and that they would promote the Protestant and Reformed faith. They swore that in front of God. That is their solemn duty in front of God, is to advance the Protestant Reformed faith. And of course, it doesn't seem, at least like this last monarch, has any intention of doing that, right? He wanted to change the vows to protect the faiths. He wants to protect Islam and Sikhism and Christianity, okay? It's so beautiful, this multiculturalism, but that's not what was in there. He has to put his hand on a Bible and swear before God and in front of the people, I will protect the Protestant Reformed faith. The British crown exists to advance the crown rights of King Jesus and set up a colony in the New World. Let's call it the Dominion of Canada after Psalm 72, okay? They used to understand this. This was an oath before God. You must advance Christian law, Christian customs, give freedom to the church to plant, and so forth. And so oaths and vows are a big deal. Okay? Scale it down smaller. When two people get married, they make wedding. Yeah. You're swearing before God to your own harm that you are going to honor your husband or your wife and keep these vows. Okay? So this is a big deal. But what was happening here is Anabaptism was already starting to spread on continental Europe. And of course, I'll ask some of our people from a Mennonite background, is there such a thing as a lawful oath or vow if you're a Mennonite? Is there such a thing as a lawful oath or vow if you're a Mennonite? There is not. You can't, right? Jesus says, let your yes be a yes and your no be a no. If you're a Mennonite, there is no such thing as a lawful oath or a lawful vow. They're all unlawful. They're all sinful. Because let your yes be yes and your no be no. Okay? Does that sound familiar? Okay? Some of us grew up with that. Yeah, Keith?
Quick question, semi-related, but not...
You can't get out of your wedding vows. I was there. Okay? Okay, so Keith is asking, as Mennonites historically don't have confessions, is that tradition passed on orally? To a large degree, yes, it is passed on orally. But and I always have to resort to one of my favorite theologians, Hank Williams Jr., who says, I am very proud of my daddy's name, even though his kind of music and mine ain't exactly the same. I'm not kicking on Mennonites. There's many things I'm proud of from my culture and I'm thankful for. There are some things that are just strange, though. So while this kind of stuff is happening, discussing the fine points about the gospel and Christology and the Trinity, the Mennonites are writing the Schleitheim Confession about buttons versus hooks, what kind of tires are sinful, and you shouldn't swear an oath or a vow even in a courtroom. There's two entirely different games happening. The Anabaptist approach to the faith wasn't like the kind of debates that are happening with Catholicism and Protestantism. It was just an entirely different type of thing. They weren't worried about theology. They were worried about practice. And of course, we should be concerned about practice. But it tended towards things rather than understanding the faith. And that's in the earliest days. So the Schleitheim Confession, which is the closest thing the Anabaptists have to a confession, really doesn't deal with anything about doctrine. There's no doctrine of God. There's no doctrine of the Trinity. There's pacifism. There's, things, but there's no skeleton underneath it. But there are documents that would say you should never make an oath or a vow. That is true. But it's a different approach. And as that was coming, the other Christians said, well, no, there is such a thing as a lawful oath and a vow. Of course, we should let our yes be a yes and our no be a no. So the fact that you're not under oath never gives you permission to lie. Okay? It's never lawful to lie, whether you're under oath or not. Let your yes always be a yes. And yet, if you're getting a crown put on your head and you are vowing before God to advance the Protestant Reformed faith, you'd better mean it. Because if you don't, there will be literal hell to pay, okay, possibly on this side of eternity as well. It just adds solemnness to it. And I think the custom of our wedding vows likewise adds solemnness. Okay, you're not allowed to lie to your wife or to your husband at other times, but the fact that there's witnesses and a public ceremony and making oaths in front of God to each other, in front of all these witnesses, so they can come to you anytime and say, Keith, I was there. You promised richer or poor, sickness and health. You promised that, Keith, right? That's why we have public weddings with witnesses. That's why we make vows. This is good. It's not bad. And it does not mean you have permission to lie at other times. It just adds gravity to certain ceremonies and things that are important. That's the background here. Does that make sense? Any further discussion on the background here or what's going on in the world? Lisa?
So if Mennonites, were they allowed to make a covenant for marriage then?
Well, that's an interesting one. I was thinking about that. Maybe some of the older people can help me, because this was always applied to a courtroom setting. So Christians can't do jury service. Christians can't be police officers. Christians can't be in the military. You can't be a mayor. You can't be a prime minister. So those kinds of things that would naturally involve oaths are not allowed. But in my recollection, I've never heard pushback against wedding vows.
Because that would make it very easy to walk away from a marriage. Then you can't.
Well, they would say no because your yes should be a yes and your no should be a no. But so let's say in the case of some Mennonites where, well, I think really all, so when we moved here, a deal was made that we don't have to swear in court. You can affirm. Right? So there's no hand on the Bible, there's no swearing, I'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You just affirm, I will tell the truth, which is fine. But there was kind of special exceptions made to grant that. But I'm curious, anyone else from that background, have you ever heard any pushback against wedding vows? I never have. But if we're to be consistent, you should not make wedding vows. You should affirm things publicly at your wedding, but they shouldn't be called vows. They shouldn't be treated like vows. I've never heard that. But I'm not saying, does anyone have anything to add to that? I don't know. Keith?
I know the conversation has come up, and I've heard it as an objection.
You, as which way an objection? That we shouldn't do vows at weddings, or that?
Well, like, if you want to be consistent, why are you doing vows at weddings?
Right.
I've heard that.
Okay. Yeah. So Keith is saying he has heard that argument in terms of consistency, and I think it's a fair argument. If you shouldn't make public oaths for public office, we shouldn't make public vows for a wedding either. We shouldn't. But, yeah, Ray, and then Margaret.
It seems like our heritage that we come from, depending on where you grew up, seems like our ancestors were very inconsistent with what they said they would be. Like I had family, they had no trouble serving as mayors and in public office, and yet they were very staunch about other things that we shouldn't do. It seems like they just got to pick and choose what they would want to believe in the Bible.
Right, so Ray's pointing out this was selectively applied, and it was. To be a mayor was wrong, but to be a Schultz, if the town needed a Christian Schultz, that's fine. But, which is a mayor by another name, right? But, and there were stories in Russia of Mennonite militias forming armed resistance against the Bolsheviks, which of course I'm totally fine with, but I'm fine against any pushback against commies is good in my books. But really that shouldn't happen. In fact, the minister shouldn't have even allowed the people to have guns. How did those guns get in the community? I don't know. Margaret? Yeah. Okay, so Margaret's saying growing up there was a catechism. Okay, I've never grown up with the catechism. My understanding was that the EMCers used to have a catechism back in the day. That was long gone before I got there. But in Mennonite history, there's a bit of a crossroads that happens. If you're living at this time during the Reformation, so those of us who grew up Mennonite, we think of a nice family, a nice Klein-Yamansha family on the farm, and it looks very conservative, and mom and dad are working, and their 6 kids are all helping, and it's just very conservative and wholesome and natural looking. Okay? That's the way it's come to us. But if you're back here, before Menno Simons shows up, the correct image of an Anabaptist is the green-haired things on Sherbrooke Street that run naked through the street. And that's not an exaggeration. The Anabaptists were revolutionaries. They were radicals. And they literally ran naked through the street. Okay? It was a revolutionary, like these people were the campus feminists. They hated all hierarchy. They hated all order. They were against everything. They like burn everything to the ground and start over with this kind of utopia, socialist, egalitarian. That was Anabaptism. And a certain strain of that is obviously carried on today. So I would actually say like the CMU approach to Anabaptism is historically an entirely consistent approach. In fact, that is Anabaptism. Now, Menno Simons came along and said, let's grow up. You guys need a dad. Let's quit hyperventilating here, right? Not everything. And so he became kind of this father figure that shaped Mennonitism as we know it, that's stable and peaceful and just raise your kids on the farm. Like that approach is also legitimate, but that came a bit later. So that's why you see again, okay, what's a Mennonite? Black coveralls in Bolivia, is that a Mennonite? Yeah. Okay. And the green-haired peace protests that result in physical force, is that Anabaptism? Yes, it is. So what's a Mennonite? Believers' baptism and peace. Basically, that's the only thing that's kind of in common. Right? But CMU is every bit as much an expression of Mennonitism or Anabaptism as the black coverall Mennonites in Bolivia are. They can both legitimately claim to be Anabaptists or Mennonites, because that's both real right from the very beginning. In fact, the radical strain is from the very beginning. The more conservative approach came like a generation or two later. But both have a real pedigree. So that growing up in a little small town with a catechism, that is one stream. That is one expression of the Mennonite faith. But not the only one. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so Pauline's saying she grew up in South America with the catechism as well. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the way I would have grown up too. I'm not even that, well, I don't think I'm that old. My grade 1 teacher was a returned missionary who taught us how to pray in High German before lunch. That's a different world completely than what the public school is now. But Mrs. Bergen, thought it was important for us to not only pray, but to pray in German. I can hardly even imagine that world was real, and that was a real world like 40 years ago, 35 years ago. That was here. It's just very, very different. Could, yeah. Maybe you should suggest it. That's how we move the conversation. Be willing to get laughed at for a few years until it's mainstream. Yeah. Just ask for more. Ask for the Lord's Prayer in German, and then be willing to settle as a moderate position. We will do the Lord's Prayer in English. That's the mediating position. Yeah. In Low German, yes. In the original Low German, yes. The original Holy Writ. Yeah. Yeah, that's a different strain. So Dave is asking, similar background as Margaret, the CMC Gortitzer Mennonites. I'm from the proper EMC Mennonites. Yeah, you guys had the Apostles' Creed. We didn't. How did that happen? I don't actually know. Because, again, whether you're of the more calm kind of Menno Simons Mennonite, or whether you're the radical revolutionary Anabaptist, at that time all creeds and confessions were wrong. They were papist traditions, and they should all be discarded, because the Apostles' Creed was garbage, right? And this is how even Menno Simons made serious Christological errors, because he just rejected all of church history. So how did that in your circles get back to having the Apostles' Creed in your catechism? I have no idea. I never grew up knowing what an Apostles' Creed was, or the Nicene Creed. It just wasn't even, it just wasn't a thing to discuss. But I'm curious, what about our people that come from Germany? Was the Apostles' Creed, was the Nicene Creed, was church history, was that a thing? No? Yeah, okay. Roger? Among the Mennonites? But, okay. 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 So in Swiss free churches, the creeds and confessions were accepted, and they were promoted and kind of taught. Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, in our circles, they were not. How it got in your circles, I'd have to look that up. I honestly don't know. Inge?
The neighboring country in Holland, we would do it at the second service as a congregation recite the Apostles' Creed every Sunday afternoon. That's how we got it in our heads too.
Yep. And so Inge's saying in Holland, they recited the Apostles' Creed during the Sunday service every afternoon. Yeah. And that's the way I know the Lord's Prayer. Just sheer repetition. I learned the Lord's Prayer the same way I learned my alphabet. You just do it every morning at school, every day of your life, and it's in your bones. So I am not at all against memory work. I think it's good. But that's several minutes of background already. Any more before we move into the actual section here? Victor. Okay, so Victor's asking, we're doing Mennonite history here. Again, if anyone thinks this is me just kicking, it's not. There's many things I'm proud of. The Haldimons are, okay, so are we all familiar with Haldimons? If you're on Kleefeld, Greenland, Rosenort, there's lots of Haldimons around here, okay? And for those who don't know, the Haldimons are those, the ladies always have a little black bonnet and a dress, and the men have a beard. The interpretation of what a beard is has gotten wide. When I was a kid, they weren't allowed to groom their beards. It was supposed to be a natural beard, so you shouldn't trim it. The beards today look pretty slick. They're pretty cleaned up and pretty well groomed. So the Haldimons here, in this region, well, I'll go back further. John Haldimand is a Swiss last name. They're from the Swiss Anabaptists. Okay, and the Swiss Anabaptists were a different group than us Russian Anabaptists. Okay, so those of us who ended up in Russia come from Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. We moved to Prussia, which is today Poland, and then from there we moved to Russia. Okay, and then from there you guys decided it was pretty good in Mother Russia, and we figured it wasn't so good. So we moved to Kansas and to the Canadian prairies. Okay, genetically, ethnically, all these German Mennonites that have come here recently, we're the same people. Ethnically, you and me are the same people, right? Some stayed in Russia, some came here earlier, then you guys came later. But we are the same people group, Russian Mennonites, which is another way of saying like Dutch and German Mennonites, okay? The Swiss Mennonites was an entirely different group, okay? Also Anabaptist, but with Swiss ethnicity and what happened in Switzerland. Those Mennonites moved to southern Ontario, to Ohio, to Pennsylvania, okay? So that's like the Amish are ethnically not at all related to us. They're Anabaptists, but they're completely different people. They're Swiss people. And the Haldimons are also Swiss Anabaptists, okay? What happened here, now I'm talking southeastern Manitoba, is we got here in 1874, okay? We started, and the original towns here are Rosenort, Kleefeld, Steinbach, Blumenort are the original Kleine Gemeinde towns. Things just got going. We're here for about 10 years. I think it was in the late 1880s. Mr. Haldimand comes up from the States to do revival meetings here because the Swiss Anabaptists were quite a bit better than the Russian ones were. So he came here to do revival meetings, and he had a very different approach to the Christian life. English was better than German, and it was actually a much more progressive kind of Christianity at that time than what the Kleine Gemeinde people here had. And he took about half of the Kleine Gemeinde became Haldimand at that time, after his revival meetings. So ethnically, we're all the same people. Like the Haldimands around here are Goosens and Taveses and Thiessens and Wolgemuths and Workingtons. They're the exact same people as me, ethnically. But in the late 1880s, they ensured, in terms of church affiliation, some stayed Kleine Gemeinde, which is today the EMC, and another half became Haldimand. And it was about half. And that's why people think, well, the EMC was so resistant to outside ministers, like if you weren't Kleine Gemeinde, you couldn't preach, and there's actually a reason for that, why they said no outside preachers. Because last time we allowed an outside preacher, he took half our people away. So they kind of built walls around that and stuff. So the Haldimands here have the same last names as me and you do. They're the same people. But the Haldimand church as a whole is Swiss and largely located in the United States and to some degree Southern Ontario. So they have very different last names than us. They have Swiss-looking last names, okay? Like the last names with an I or a Y at the end, like Jancy and that kind of stuff. Those Swiss-looking names, or like Brubacher, and they're Swiss. I hope I'm not saying anything against the Swiss. just a matter of fact, just a matter of history, Tim. Oh, the Hutterites. Okay. All right, let's close our confessions. The Hutterites are Eastern European Anabaptists. So they come from like the Czech Republic, Moravia, also Anabaptist, believers' baptism and stuff. Their founder, Jacob Hutter, I believe he was a Czech. So you've got a pocket in northwestern Europe, that's my kind of people. You've got another pocket in Switzerland, and then you've got a pocket further east in kind of southeastern Europe. And the Hutterites come from those, which is actually why. Has anyone noticed Hutterites kind of look like Eastern Europeans? Like you watch the Slovak men's hockey team and they look like Hutterites? Anyone know? Because they are. Okay, or I should put it the other way around. So, but those three groups all had some contact with each other. So actually, when it came time to explore Manitoba, there was a delegation that included Hutterites and Mennonites. So Mr. Taves was like the representative for the Mennonites, and there was a Hutterite delegation. They came to explore Manitoba, and they said, yeah, that looks good, let's move. So they kind of migrated as a group, but there was a difference there. More on this. David. Okay, so you're saying, and that's what you guys would have done at your wedding? Okay, so David is saying in their background, you made a promise, a public promise, but not necessarily called a vow. But it is a public promise. Yeah, okay, and to me that would make sense. Yeah. Okay, why don't we dig in here then? I jokingly closed it, but let's get started. Okay. Here it says, and for everyone that's not a Mennonite, I'm sorry, but there's so many strains here, and I find history interesting, so, and that is a legitimate background to why this is in here. So, a lawful oath is an element of religious worship in which a person swearing in truth, righteousness, and judgment solemnly calls God to witness what is sworn, and to judge the one swearing according to the truth or falsity of it. Okay? So this is an element of religious worship, and first of all let's just stop right there. How often do we make oaths and vows in corporate worship? How often do we do that? Not very often, do we? Membership vows, I suppose. Okay? So we should stop right there and say it's an element of religious worship. Most oaths and vows are not made during private worship or during corporate worship. What this is saying is anytime you make an oath or a vow, that is a religious act. Okay? So if you are in a courtroom and you swear to tell the truth, you are swearing in front of God. It is an element of religious worship. You just brought religion into the courtroom, as you should, but be very careful. Okay? You have invoked God as your witness. Okay? That's fine, that's lawful, but it's saying there's now religious weight behind this, because now as a Christian, you are acknowledging God in your truth telling. And this is a really big deal. So if that first bit throws you off there, that it's an element of religious worship, and we don't really have oaths and vows as part of corporate worship or family worship, that's why that's in there. In which a person swearing in truth, righteousness, and judgment solemnly calls God to witness what is sworn. And to there we have three texts here. Who wants to go to Exodus 20, verse 7? Who wants to take that? Bryson? Deuteronomy 10, verse 20? Carter? And then Jeremiah 4, verse 2. Tyson? Okay, go ahead, Bryson.
Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the
Okay, very good, thank you. So third commandment, don't use the Lord's name in vain. And again, that is not limited to using God's name as a swear word. That includes any frivolous use of God's name, okay? Including making an oath in his name. So any unserious use of God's name is a serious thing. Carter, Deuteronomy 10, verse 20.
Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God. Him shalt thou serve, and to him shalt thou cleave and swear by his name.
Okay. So we shall. Yep. And then Jeremiah 4, verse 2.
And if you swear as the Lord lives, in truth, in justice, and in righteousness, then the nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him shall they glory.
Okay. So you see it right there. In Scripture itself, there's lawful oaths. Right? This is fine. Just do it seriously. Don't do it frivolously. Bryson, you had your hand up. Okay, good question. So Bryson's asking, is an oath always connected to a covenant? Why do we have two words? Because we kind of use those two words the same, right? Strictly speaking, an oath is made in human arrangements, like a marriage covenant, let's say. Strictly speaking, that's an oath. It's a promise between people in front of God. Whereas a vow, strictly speaking, we tend to use those words kind of interchangeably. Strictly speaking, a vow is directly between man and God, like a Nazirite vow. I'm not going to cut my hair, I'm not going to do this. Strictly speaking, it's direct between man and God. An oath is human-facing with God as a witness. So if we wanted to use very particular language, we make wedding oaths. But we tend to use the language interchangeably. But I'm not, am I understanding? Yeah? Okay, good. Dave.
In fairness to that, yes and yes, like nobody knows that Mennonites did. But also remember there was a time in parts of Europe where people would use exactly these passages, some groups that didn't believe in the New Testament, and say, well, I didn't technically swear by God, therefore I can.
Right.
So I mean, there is also that side of, like, you know, if you're dealing with certain groups that you have to get to the point where you have to explain to them that yes was yes, regardless of whether or not you swore.
Right. So Dave Weeb is our strongest Anabaptist here. And no, but he's pointing out in defense of the frivolous oath and vow taking that was happening. But that was already happening. The Pharisees were already doing that, right? The Pharisees would not swear by God. They'd swear by the temple, or they'd swear, right? And then they kind of, it's like, you know, on the playground when you make a promise and your fingers are crossed, it's your way out. So they'd swear by the temple so that they weren't technically swearing by God. So then they felt like they had permission to back out of their oaths and vows. And Jesus calls them on that, right? And that's actually, I think, the root of that teaching. Just because you swore by the temple doesn't give you a free pass to lie. Right? There's a gravity when you're making a public-facing promise, but you never have permission to lie. So swearing, don't swear on your mother's grave, or swearing on all these things that people do. That's not a legal loophole to get out of truth-telling, right? And that was happening in this era, but that was already happening in Jesus' time. The Pharisees were making frivolous oaths and vows, intending to get out of them at some future point.
And that was the same thing.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. They intentionally tried backing out. Yep. No, exactly. More on this. Okay, so can you see right here there's a precedent. There's a lawful way to make an oath, and it's a blessing to the nation if you make a godly oath. We just read it right here, okay? After note 1, and to judge the one swearing according to the truth or falsity of it. Who wants to take 2 Chronicles 6, 22 and 23? Howard.
If a man sins against his neighbor and is made to take an oath, and comes and swears his oath before your altar in this house, then hear from heaven, and act and judge your servants, repaying the guilty by bringing his conduct on his own head, and vindicating the righteous by rewarding him according to his righteousness.
Okay. So again, there you have it. Okay, this is a lawful practice. And we need to judge with just weights and measures according to what has been said, what has been promised, what has been oathed, so to speak. Okay? So there is a lawful way to do this. And then just think through, if you know your Bibles reasonably well, does God ever swear by his own name? Yeah. Okay? If an oath was in itself wicked, God couldn't do it. But he does. Okay? Does the nation of Israel make an oath at Sinai? All this we will do. Right? Yeah. It's not wrong. Does the Apostle Paul testify under oath? Yes, he does. Does Abraham make an oath? Yes, this isn't wrong in itself. Using it frivolously, trying to back out of it, going into it intending to find some loophole to get out, of course that's wrong. Okay? We always need to be truth tellers. But there's nothing inherently wrong about an oath or a vow itself, or God would not do it himself, and his servants would not be positively recorded as having done it either when they are entering into covenant, as Bryson pointed out. This is frequently part of a covenant, is some kind of oath ceremony, right? And it's not wrong. It's good. Just good. It adds gravity to the truth-telling. Keith and then Inga.
What's an example of proper word usage for if by his name shall swear? Like versus obviously all the other things that we can't swear on heaven and stuff like that in our own head. What would be a correct usage? Is how it's done in court correct? I don't know.
I think the way it's done in court or the way we do it at weddings is correct. It's clearly, I don't know that there's an exact wording that we have to use or not use, but what should be clear, let's say at a wedding, and this is why I'm not a fan of eloping, because it actually kind of subverts the whole point of why we have wedding ceremonies. Not that there's exactly a biblical way that what a wedding ceremony should look like, but it should be public. I think it should be done by a religious officiant to clearly invoke God into this ceremony. And then there's witnesses. Now, does there have to be 300 witnesses? No, if it's a small wedding, but it's public. And there's public oaths. God is clearly invoked. It's clear that this is a religious ceremony, right? That this is before the face of God. We mean it. There's gravity to these words, and there's witnesses to hold us to account. And that's how God cuts covenants biblically as well. They're public. There's a ceremony involved to it. There's a mutual understanding that what we're entering into. This is how God cuts covenant with Israel. This is how God cuts covenant with Moses. This is how it works, right? David's coronation ceremony is public. Can the form or the wording change? Yeah, I think so. But it just needs to be clear this is before the face of the living God. This is before the face of the triune God. There's witnesses to hold us to account, and we're taking it seriously. We're not looking for a legal loophole on our way out.
To Bryson's question earlier, there is an oath. You're saying essentially God's wrath on me if I was to.
That's right. Yeah, so to Bryson's point and to Keith's point, you are asking God to pour out his hatred on you if you break it. That's what you're asking for. That's what an oath is. I deserve the judgment of God if I break these words. Right? When God, one of the most vivid illustrations of that is when God makes his covenant with Abraham. Remember, in the night vision, and there's smoking, and there's thunder, okay, and there's pots kind of bubbling over. And then Abram cuts animal pieces in half. So there's bloody carcasses all over the place, and then God passes through them. What is going on there? God says, so be it to me if I would ever break my word to you. My fate will be worse than these animals that were cut in half and are dripping blood as they hang from the meat locker. And Keith, at your wedding, you did the exact same thing. When a man swears to be faithful to his wife, you are saying, so be it to me if I would ever break my word to my wife. Those dead animals it's a vivid reminder of how serious covenant is. You're saying, so be it to me if I break my word. If I lie to this woman. That's a serious, serious thing. Yeah. You just did. One more? Okay. Yeah.
In the case of
Right. Okay, so there's two issues there. One has to do to whom truth is owed. And there's a story, he's talking about, 1930s Germany and hiding people under the floorboards. Corrie ten Boom's sister actually one time said when the soldiers showed up and they asked, do you have anyone here? And they'd hidden them under the table, and the table's just standing there in the open. And she actually just outrightly said the truth. Well, they're under the table. And the soldier said, no, there's no one under the table. And they kind of left in a huff. She literally told the truth. There's a whole discussion on the ethics of, in wartime, evil people. Do Christians owe the truth to evil people? Were the Hebrew midwives sinning? We'll leave that because that's well beyond the scope of what we want to discuss here. But if it came to swearing an oath in court, let's say if there would be, in a case like that, where it would be lawful to not tell the truth to an evil person, would I take an oath in court and double down on it? I think then you can't. You just simply can't. That would for sure be unlawful, no question. That ethical issue is very easy. The first ethical issue is much more complicated, but for the interest of time and scope, we're not going to get into that here. Inga, you had your hand up.
So the questions you ask us at our baptism,
Yep.
is that an oath?
I would say so. I mean, we don't use that language, but when we take in members, and this is good for all of us here, when we take in members either by transfer or by baptism, you are saying certain things to the members of this church. You're going to work for the peace and the unity of this church. We're not doing infighting. We're not doing lobby groups. We're not being selfish. We're not being greedy. We're going to live a life according to a believer. We're going to submit to the governance and to the doctrine of the church more broadly. That's serious. Okay, and so nobody should make membership vows to a church any more frivolously than they would wedding vows. It's serious. If you say we're going to do this, if you're going to become baptized, if you're going to become a member of a church, that's serious. You're promising to use your gifts. You're promising to serve. You're promising to live a life consistent with a believer. If you break that, you've said your word means nothing. Right? And that's serious business. You just lied to the church in front of God. That's pretty serious. Breaking your membership vows is serious business. Carter.
So on the flip side of that, is it biblically moral to ever plead the fifth, so to speak? Or as a Christian, are we called to always, even if it would incriminate like someone that we know or someone that we love, are we called to always say, or would there be a case where we are allowed to keep our silence?
I think okay, so Carter's asking about pleading the fifth or just staying silent. I have never landed on a great place on that because Christian ethicists are, let's say, wartime truth-telling. The commies are at the door, and are there any small children here? Do you have permission to lie? Actually, the vast majority of Christian ethicists would say under that circumstance, we owe the truth to whom the truth is owed, and wicked governments and evil people are not that kind of a person. So the Hebrew midwives, this is the majority report. There's a minority report too, and I'm not totally settled because I'm uncomfortable with either answer actually. But that approach would say the midwives were not lying. Rahab was not, or they were lying, but they did nothing wrong. Rahab did nothing wrong. They were fine because those were enemies of God. They didn't do it under oath. They didn't invoke God's name. I'm uncomfortable with that because that seems to move pretty quickly towards situational ethics, which no Christian can embrace. So I'm a little bit agnostic on that question. And I think in that case, silence might just be the best. Just don't say anything. Just ignore that they're there. Is that possible? I don't know. But I'm uncomfortable with kind of either approach. This is way different than I expected. That's good. Let's go Dave, and then Lisa, and then we should bring it in for a landing. Okay.
So as a Christian, and promise something to you, is that considered an oath?
If we promise something? I think so. I think if we promise something, do we call it an oath? Not necessarily, but if our yes is to be a yes and our no be a no, I would say it even goes down to, and I'm not saying I've done this correctly, But if I'm unsure if I will be able to keep my promise that we're going for ice cream after supper, then we don't say we're going for ice cream after supper. You can say we'll see what it looks like then. But I think even in mundane parenting things, if you say we're going to do something, you have to follow through. And if you don't know with certainty that you can follow through, then don't say we will. Whether you call that an oath or not, I don't know. But it's certainly part of the truth-telling. Just, if you told your 4-year-old we're going for ice cream after supper, you must. Or an apology is required. Okay? But better, I'd say, and that's important for all of us as parents in that kind of a setting. If you're not sure, then just say we'll see. It's far safer. Because children are learning and they're watching, oh, well, you can say one thing and do another. They're learning that. And that's not what we want to teach them. We want to teach them to be consistent. Okay. Let's bring it in. And then we will start on section 2 next week. Father God, thank you for wide-ranging discussion. Lord, I want to thank you for an opportunity for interactive discussion like this. Lord, I want to thank you for the way you teach us through your word and for opportunities to discuss it. Lord, and I pray that as we all examine our own lives and our duty and our obligation as Christians to be truth tellers, whether that's in small things or whether it's under heavy things like an oath or a vow with gravity, Lord, I pray that you would give us the moral fortitude to be truth tellers, to let our yes be a yes and our no be a no, and when there's extra ceremony around it, that we would for sure be mindful that these are serious things. Lord, I pray that even as we consider our marriage vows and our baptism and our membership covenants and promises and oaths and vows that we make to one another, Lord, I pray that we would not treat those as throwaway things, but that we would take them very seriously, that we would be willing to live in harmony, that we would be willing to walk a walk that is consistent with your word, that we would actively pursue the peace and the purity of the church, and that we would actively serve as we have said we would. Lord, I pray now that you be with us at time of fellowship and prepare our hearts for corporate worship later on this morning. Thank you for your kindness. We pray this all in the strong name of Jesus, and amen.